Yep, that's looking better. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So if I move it.
Yeah, good.
Okay. So sorry, let me just get the technology working here. So apologies for looking sideways because it's on the screen too. So this is similar. I didn't see Kate's presentation the other day, but we're at the same stage at Leeds. She's full-time, I'm part-time. So at the end of her first full year, and this is the end of my second full year at Leeds, they make you go for a transfer. So you have to put together your research into a proposal, and it's a formal stage. So I went through and had a presentation last July, and my examiners said it's good, but you need to rewrite it. So, or do a few things, so which I've done. So I haven't had the resit of the presentation, but this is, so to speak, the final draft, other than some edits from my supervisor. So the topic of my research is expressing the unpresentable through sculpture. And tonight, I'd just like to quickly run you through, so the introduction, the research questions, the theoretical context, the practice context, other artists, the research gap, which you need in a PhD, and then the practice background, which is my work that's relevant to it. So, I mean, a reasonable question is, what on earth do you mean by the unpresentable? And it's something that I grapple with a bit myself, but it really starts with the Kantian sublime, but it also includes, let's say, the figural of Deleuze, of the logic of sensation, the liminal, the unpresentable, the unrepresentable, and the unsayable. So it floats around a little bit in my mind, but I would say it is really based on the Kantian sublime. And so it's quite key that it's a formless sensation in the mind of the viewer. And so the question for me is, how do you use sculpture, which is something physical, to invoke something that's formless and unpresentable? And one of the things that I've been toying with is the idea of social mediation or phenomenological. And I've come to the conclusion, which I'll go through a little bit, that they're on the same track and they're complementary. Anyway, so the research question, which is, quite critical on this, and I think my first questions were far too vast, so I've had to narrow it down. So the key question is, how can sculpture evoke the unpresentable by combining phenomenological and socially mediated strategy, and through the deployment of material, color, absence, and scale? And then there's various sub-questions using material agency, voids and negatives, and phenomenology, et cetera, et cetera. But that's the basic question. And then, so the theoretical context. So as I say, it starts with the Kantian sublime. So as we've discussed in the past in the reading group, the Kantian sublime, mathematical and dynamical sublime. And for Kant, the sublime is formless. And the key thing is that an adequate presentation of the sublime isn't possible, because it's so vast or so overwhelming. And a key part of Kant's theories, which a lot of people contest, is that there's a lot of a priori elements, or otherwise things that are fixed irrespective of yourself, that are, in other words, not socially mediated conditions. So then another key one is Jean-Luc Nancy. And again, some of this is the influence of Jonathan, because my MA dissertation at the Royal College was on the contemporary sublime. So some of this is borrowing from that. So Jean-Luc Nancy, in A Finite Thinking, excellent book, I thought. So again, the sublime is formless and immeasurable. And I mean, key thing for him, which takes off from the Kantian sublime, that a presentation takes place, but it doesn't present anything, and it presents the non-presentable. So you might have something, but in the end, what happens is there's actually nothing that's presented. It's more of a sensation. So a continual coming into presence. And so the key thing is, in the sublime, you can't represent it. So you're really trying to enact it in the mind of the viewer. So Brian Massumi, in his affect theory, which follows on from the Kantian sublime from Bergson and Merleau-Ponty. But for him, intensities are, which follows on from Deleuze, and intensity and affect, so that for him that intensity, and again, as it does for Deleuze, it sits below cognition. But where Masumi's affect theory is a little bit different is that it does bring in social mediation. So there is a social construct that goes into it. But so I think what, out of all of this, the key thing that my takeaway from this is that the sculpture isn't a representation of something, but rather you're creating a field of intensities, and where you're trying to create a reaction in the viewer's mind by those intensities to create an embodied experience. So then Merleau-Ponty in phenomenology, and for him, there's a precognitive understanding of the world where you can understand the world without the use of symbols or social mediation. And that's picked up by others. And Henri Bergson, which is actually before Merleau-Ponty, and I think this is for me, is quite an important book, is that perceptions are interlaced with memories, and that interaction creates intensities. And I think the memories then can include social mediation, so your memories of your cultural upbringing. But I'd like to make the argument that that memory can also be, say, near universal experiences of things such as light, heat, gravity, and so forth. So there can be phenomenological elements that we perhaps mostly share in common, which form part of our memory, then form part of the perceptions and the intensities. And Sir Walter Benjamin, and I particularly am drawn to the dialectical image, where for him, and again, it's a bit of social history embedded into Walter Benjamin, but the past and present combine to form an image, and it's suddenly emergent. And so it's a perception of bodily memory and culturally inscribed past that come together, and that's an attractive concept. And then Gilles Deleuze, and I particularly like the logic of sensation, and I've struggled my way through difference and repetition. And I've had my book, Difference and Repetition for Dummies, reading it side by side with it, but I still have to give it another read. But again, as for some of the other theorists, that the intensities are the primary elements, and that the intensities are, let's say, precognitive. So you don't need to think about them. They're almost that you react to them. And so again, in sculpture, trying to activate those. And then Lyotard, and again, it's somewhat contradictory, some of the things that he's written, but when he wrote about Barnett Newman's paintings, so he would argue that actually that it is the instant in Newman's paintings. But then again, along a Kantian line, because in fact he did quite an interesting little book on the Kantian sublime, which is Lessons on the Analytic of the Sublime, which is the 4 or 5 chapters of Kant in the Critique of Judgment that talk about the sublime. But again, his thing, which I allude to in all of this, is that it's not possible to represent the infinite or absolute magnitude. But what he does say, which I've latched on to, is that you can invoke it in a Kantian way by a negative presentation, which I'll come on to in a little bit. So again, not to dwell too long on that. So that was a lot of blokes there on the theory. So now, in terms of the artists, the specific ones, it'll be all women, but I won't go through all the artists on this matrix. But this is a matrix that I've developed. And so from left to right, I've called it environment, installation, and on the right, object. So kind of the larger things that you would walk through on the left, and then the individual objects on the right. And then going from top to bottom, I've said phenomenological to socially mediated. So that something like Tara Donovan's styrofoam cups, which is in the top of in the middle, is something that I suggest that you relate to mostly phenomenologically, because there's not that much social context to it. Whereas something like the lower right-hand corner, the wristwatch there, which is with the Nagasaki atomic bomb, you only get a meaning or a resonance because you know about the atomic bomb and just the horrific nature of that. So I've tried to map various reference artworks on that scale, from left to right and top to bottom. So again, I won't talk about each artwork, so just a handful of them in a little bit of detail. So the first one is Matrix, and the artist is Rei Naito, and she worked with the architect Ru Nishisawa, who's one half of the architectural firm Sana, in case those of you that are architecturally inclined. And this is a pretty cool project on the Tashima Art Museum. It's a little island. I've not been there. And it's a concrete dome that's set, and there's a natural spring over which it's built. So the concrete springs percolates up through the slab, and there's a slight slope to it and holes. So the water will percolate, run across the slab, and go into holes. And you can't really see it in the photographs here, but there's bits of string or thread that are hanging down that oscillate in the wind. So I would say something like this is, because of its size, it's an installation. So it's a three-way environment between you, the object, and the environment. And I would say that most of the reaction I would call phenomenological. So you don't need a cultural background to know, let's say, about the atomic bomb or the Holocaust or something else to have the reaction. And so I'd say this would be kind of a fairly pure example of it. Though in fairness, there is a social construct that goes with it because you are in the context of an art gallery. So already that primes your mind in a way. So I don't think you can ever get away into pure phenomenological or pure social construct. There's always a mixture of the two. But I would say this would be predominantly a phenomenological response. So then you have, and I know I've talked about this in the past in our reading group, the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C., designed by Maya Lin, and which is an amazing project to walk around. Then it commemorates the 50,000 U.S. servicemen who died in the Vietnam War. It doesn't commemorate the 1 million Vietnamese that died in the war, but that's a different subject. But I'd say it's a very moving monument, and it combines social mediation because of where it is and how it references the names and references the war. So it relies heavily on that. But I would say because of also the way that you move through space and the way that you go down into the earth and come out, and that it's a cut into the hill, it's also a very phenomenological experience. So I think it's a terrific piece of work. And then Dora Salcedo's Unland Audible in the Mouth. This is, and many of you will be familiar with this. Her background is from Colombia and the Civil War and the killings that have happened there. And so this table, as many of you will know, will be two disjointed tables, in this case put together, human hairs and silk threads, gashes that are put into it. So to me, there's an indication of absence or hidden tension. So the absence indicates the presence of something that isn't there. And so I think it works on both the phenomenological and a socially mediated level, but you can, even without knowing the backstory of it, you would think you'd have an uncanny feeling looking at this, just because of the disjointed nature. So, and then I think I've touched on Kristeva's concept of objection. So it hovers on the boundary of what is assimileable or thinkable. So again, a very powerful piece of work. And then moving on, again, most of you will know this and perhaps saw it when it was up reinstalled a year or two ago at the Tate. Cold Dark Matter by Cornelia Parker. And again, I would say this operates on both phenomenological and a socially mediated level. Because it's an exploded shed, which you can see being exploded there in the bottom series of photographs, it does have ties to British middle-class culture from the post-war, but I think it works very well on a phenomenological level in that the shadows are as important as the solid pieces, and there's a tension, I would argue, between the shadows and the solid bits, and that creates an intensity in the mind of the viewer. So I think the two combine very, very well. And then this is more in the socially constructed realm. And this is the Judenplatz Memorial by Rachel Whiteread in Vienna. And the site in 1420 or thereabouts was a synagogue that was burnt down by arsonists. So it's an emotionally charged site in the city to begin with. And of course, this is a memorial to the Austrian Jews that were murdered in the Holocaust in World War II. And the use of the negative casting appeals to me a great deal. And I think that there's an implication of what's a presence through absence in the negative castings, which in this case, I think works extremely well for the monument, in addition to the direct references to the Holocaust. So again, the concept of the negative is something that I've been working with in my own projects. So the research gap. So and again, it's sometimes hard to find, what the gap is, but because in theory, the PhD is meant to be the creation of new knowledge. That's the basis of it anyway. And so there's been a lot of theory about the unpresentable and the figural and the sublime, but there's very little that's been written about this, that in context to the sculptural process and how the sculptural process invokes that sensation. So I think there's a little bit of a gap to dive into. And I would make the argument, though, it's that a lot of sculpture will veer towards one or the other, whether it's phenomenological or it's socially mediated. But I would somewhat argue that that a lot of sculpture doesn't actively employ both approaches. So I'd say there's a smaller gap with something like that. And again, in exploring the unpresentable, how does material agency factor into that? There's a lot of work on material agency, but I would say less so in connection to accessing the sublime or the unpresentable. And similarly, the use of absence or the negative, let's say in the case of Rachel, let's say Rachel Whiteread's example, there's an opportunity there. And then I think also with the use of color and how that can work, and there's been a lot of work in painting, particularly on that, but not so much color and sculpture in terms of the unpresentable. So notwithstanding the work of Philip King or Anthony Caro in terms of the color that they use. So practice background, so just in terms of my own work that I'm doing in support of this, and this isn't by any means the final presentation, this is just work leading up to getting started, so to speak. So again, so I've mapped out in that same map that I was talking about earlier between environment, so large scale on one side and object on another, phenomenological to socially mediated. So I realize in putting this together, I've tended to the upper right-hand corner of it, and I'd like to try and broaden that a little bit. So again, I won't go through all of those projects, but just a couple of them. So this is a fairly recent project. I think I've shared it on some of our evening discussions. And this is using a human head, a 3D scan of a human head, my wife's head, with a model on the computer, and then using that as a cutting tool then to create this. So I thought that was, so the work itself is, I don't know, maybe about 400 mil high or something like that, 500 mil high. And I thought it was fairly successful in that you don't recognize that it's a human head, but there's something, or at least to me, when you look at it, that catches the imagination or catches something about that you can't quite put your finger on it. So everything that you see there is the negative of something positive. So using the negative to bring on what isn't there. I've experimented in this case with using a single strong color to see how that works in terms of something to generate an intensity. So I'm not so sure, how well that works. And then I've been reading some of the poems of Paul Celan recently, and a lot of his poems deal with absence and void and human beings not being there. So that's where this comes from, one of his poems, the name Touch Across the Void. And this is a larger piece, and this was part of our book project, the one that I put in there. And again, this uses that same 3D scan, and it's just a much larger piece. It took me 6 months to make this. And again, so it's thousands of cuts with the computer head and then assembling in 6 mil segments and building it together. And I would say that, again, probably the response to this is more phenomenological. And I'd say could probably be stronger if there were more socially mediated elements into it. And I thought the use of black was interesting, and I think there's some cultural mediation that goes with black, starting back from Malevich's Black Square, and I think there's something to explore in that. And this is also a fairly recent work. This is again so Count Me Among the Almonds again is based on a Paul Celan poem, and as is this title, Nothing Still Holds. So this is 3 torsos, female torsos, but made from a mannequin, and then with iron oxide on it, so a rusting process. And I thought this was fairly successful in that the castings are a negative of something that's not there. And then the 3 torsos create a negative space between them. So I think the negative amplifies the negative. And then I think in terms of the social construction, I think the rust has a construction of decay and mortality and fragility. So I think it works well together. And so I think there's something positive in this piece. And then experimenting in the way, well, I didn't show Tara Donovan's work, and I probably should have done that as a reference piece. That some of the works I'm looking at using, let's say, repetition of everyday or simple elements that are not, that have less social mediation, to see how that works in invoking the sublime. So again, using the Kantian mathematical repetition. And then the one on the left trying to use complementary colors to again invoke some intensities just from the contrast in color. And then this is an older piece, but I think what I liked about it is, again, the use of the negative or what isn't there and creating something in your mind. So this is a series of slices put together, and when you look at it, it looks like something more solid. So I thought there was something just as for the future to do on that. These pieces look at the use of gravity and then fixing gravity in the case with concrete and cement on the right and then jesmonite on the left. And so fixing gravity and demonstrating the invisible force of showing something that isn't there. And then again, using a strong color on the left to see if that can invoke an intensity. And then whereas white again has a cultural connotation, certainly in the art world, and to see, what that does in the representation. And this was from a residency project a couple of years ago in Lake Como, and responding to the geological forces that shape the mountains of Lake Como. And could one give expression to those forces? So the implied forces, and then those generate intensities, and does that work? And then this was a house I designed 35 years ago in Connecticut. And so this is meant to be artwork in an environment. And again, the intent, at least when designing it, was that it was a phenomenological approach, and that you experience your body with movement, light, and time, and being situated and placed in the natural environment. And so again, primarily phenomenological, trying to use materials, stone and timber, to reinforce that. But there is a social construct of what it means to be in nature, even though it is phenomenological. This was a project when I was at Wesleyan College before I was at the Royal College, and it's the home of Edward James, who is a surrealist art collector, and he gave his house over to the college, which is now part of University of Sussex. And so this was a proposed installation doing paper mache castings of the human figure, but based on a mannequin, and then placing it in one of the main hallways. So you can see some of the surrealist artworks here and on the wall. So it was responding to that. So again, it was an installation, so meant to be phenomenological, but definitely referencing the surrealist history and trying to bring that social mediation into the project. This was, again, experimenting a sculpture, and again, done at the Royal College, again, using the use of mirrors and reflections, and what does that do, and the negative of a negative, and how is your sensation in looking at that? And I thought there was some promise in that for the future. And then my dissertation piece or final piece at the Royal College, Between Earth and Sky, and again, the expressing the negative through gravity and a single strong color. And that in rushing through is it. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that was packed with loads of information.
Yeah,
Brilliant. Thank you.
Rushing through, but thank you.
Yeah,
I missed the beginning, but is this a presentation that you're doing for something else and it coincides with us, or is this is that, because I wasn't quite sure about the intro.
Yeah. So it was it's my transfer, it's extracted from my transfer document. So that's the title. I didn't put all the title headings in there, but the main headings. And then just summarizing briefly some of the key things out of the transfer document. So I was saying, I think maybe just before you logged on, Vonda, that Kate and I are at the same stage at the University of Leeds, that she's been there 1 year full-time and I've been there 2 years part-time. And we need to get through I don't know how it works at the Royal College, but at Leeds, after 1 year, you have to go through a transfer process.
Yes.
Your PhD gets accepted.
Right.
So that's what this is for.
Oh, okay. Oh, great. Are you just, I mean, aside from the presentation, are you spending a lot of time in Leeds?
No, I go up about once a month to see my supervisors, and that's
Right.
about all I go, because I've got studio space here in London, and so I work there and at home and that kind of stuff.
And so is your, are you, which department are you in Leeds?
Fine art.
Fine art. And same as Kate?
No, she's in a different one. She's in design, but there's a lot of overlap between the two
Right.
departments.
Oh, okay. So I was interested in this, in a lot of what, I mean, you know, you've sort of whizzed through it pretty fast, but this idea of the negative, um, I mean, I don't know, I'm just waffling on a bit, but I found it's just very interesting the way you're exploring that concept or that way of working. Um, and some of them I thought were really, like the last piece you showed, I thought was really had quite a wow factor. I don't know how big it is.
Pretty big.
Oh, right. Is it, how big is it?
In the red one, it's probably I don't know, 4 or 5 meters long, and it's as tall. It's about 2 meters tall, 2 and a bit meters tall.
Right. And what was it, suspended or how?
Yes. So it was, yeah. So those photographs were taken in, what is it, the Hockney Gallery at the Royal College. But then
Yeah,
obviously for the final show, it was installed in the new building.
right. And just for, I mean, obviously there's other ones whether you've been talking about the negative, but how did you how did your assessors, if you like, respond to that piece? Did you get any, because I found for my PhD Viva, I got a lot of very useful feedback actually from the,
Um,
and I just wondered what happened when you presented that work, what kind of feedback did you get?
Well, actually, because the way it worked, because as I was saying to the group, I had one interview with examiners, so not my supervisors, and they've sent me back to do some rewrite, this is the basis of the rewrite. So in the submission document, which is a different one to this, those works were in there, but that we didn't talk about that piece in particular. But some of the other ones we talked about. And I think everybody felt, and I feel as well, that the concept I've been exploring, which you touched on, Vonda, of exploring the negative, has been very fruitful.
Yeah,
So I've been, it's just something I'm trying to mine and go forward with in different aspects.
yes. And how obviously you're moving away from sort of obvious tropes, architectural tropes, into something far more sculptural. Is that your intention?
Yeah, and what I'd like to do, and I put is in part of the work plan, is I'd like to do some proposals for public artworks or of a larger scale.
Yeah,
But I don't want to solely do that. But I'd like to do some in parallel, maybe do one or two a year and do either decent models or decent visualizations of them, and just explore if there's a way to pursue that.
right. And when I like the diagram you gave of the social, the liminal, the four concepts that you were kind of looking at, and you said something about wanting to move more into the social.
Yeah,
And I just, in terms of this negative, there's a Cornelia Parker blowing up a hut. Um, Obviously the Rachel White read. But I wondered for you, what would your, moving into the social, what is the area that interests you in on a social level?
well, I think you'd have to pick something, resonated. So remember when we were at the Royal College just before COVID, there was an opportunity in Shoreham in Kent to do an installation. So a number of us were going to install there. So I put a proposal together, just ratcheting around for ideas, and I found that it was the home of the first soldier executed for desertion in World War I. So I put a proposal together of a monument with 306 rotting oranges in it, because that's how many were executed in World War I.
306, what did you say? 306 rotting oranges.
Sorry, 306 soldiers were executed for desertion in World War I.
Yes.
The first one to be executed came from Shoreham, Kent, where this exhibition was going to be.
Yes.
So I put together a proposal of a work that I built the bit of work, but never installed it because of COVID. And at the base of it would have had 306 oranges. So just they would have been sitting there rotting over the course of a month or whenever this thing would have been installed. So
Why choose oranges?
it seems, a piece of fruit, something that is organic and would decay. So in the way that a human body would decay. So as I say, one could argue whether that was naive or not to do that, but I was trying to tap into, find a hook into a social connection to the place.
Yeah.
Maybe
So I'd like
apples
to
would
do,
be better.
oh, I'm sorry, Chad.
No, maybe apples. What an apple or a
Could
good
use
apple.
apples, could use prunes, could be, all kinds of things. But yeah, it was just the idea of having something that was organic and that would change fairly quickly and decay over time, to introduce decay into the, so that was the idea of it. But the idea was trying to touch on to that social memory.
Yes.
Lester, I'd like to just ask, when you've been making your sculptures and going through the PhD research and theories, has that influenced what materials you use in your sculpting?
I guess so, and to some degree, but it's also, there's just practical limitations of size and doing very large pieces. Literally, what do you do with it, and where do you put it? And the larger it is, well, it depends what it is, can often take a lot longer to make.
Yeah.
So I guess, just practical things have pushed me. That's why most of the things that I've done in the last couple of years have been more object-based, just because of the scale factor. And I guess I've latched on to this idea, I've liked it because, as you'll appreciate, from being an architect and contour maps and how you can analyze a piece of topography by putting it into slices on a topography map and applying that to the negative computer castings and doing it that way. So it's just a combination of things that just appealed to me, just I guess because of my architectural background. But sorry.
And do you introduce sort of figure ground analysis within your studies? Because you're talking about negative spaces and
actually I haven't done, but I think that's a really good idea to do that. And well, I've done it on the computer, with the negative and the figure ground, so to speak, but I should do it more formally. I think that's a very good idea.
But I've actually seen your work in real life in the corridors, and
Yes,
you're working on it.
blocking the fire corridors. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, I love it. I love the piece. There's a few of them. The red one that you showed at the end, that's just amazing. But the one that you made of your wife, and it was the black one, the one you photographed. That's magnificent. But I like the material you used before.
Yeah.
And I know you wanted to be black because of this reference to something, but the material you're using, which nobody's seen in this presentation, is that wonderful material that it's like a khaki material, and it's incredible. It's beautiful, but you didn't want to leave it like that.
Yeah, I know what Chud is referring to is the material is 6 millimeter water resistant MDF, so it's green in color. And
Oh.
so it has quite an interesting look and it was laser cut. And so it has quite an interesting look just in its raw state. And so Chud kept
like a
telling me
map.
just leave it.
I just like the untouched version, and you have to figure out it's a person. It looks like a map, and it looks like one of those topological maps of a terrain, which it is. It's a face, but you never work out that it was a face. And it was a bit like Tony Cragg, but you made it different. Whereas the red one looks like Tony Cragg.
Yeah, no, it's true, actually, yeah.
And this one doesn't look like Tony Cragg, and you're trying to figure out what the hell is. The material is fantastic. That green, it's unique. I haven't seen anybody using that.
Yeah, so Chud liked it so much that there were sheets of the MDF. I had, oh, I don't know, a few hundred of them cut. And so there's lots of waste products, so to speak, and so Chud grabbed, I mean, with my blessing, a lot of the offcuts there just
I
for
know.
to use for something.
They're beautiful. They're actually the negative, aren't they?
The negative of a negative of a negative, yeah. So it's
They're
like that must make
beautiful.
them a positive.
Chud might sell it for a positive. Be careful.
She probably will.
But the material you use is fantastic. I mean, all the time you're using different materials. You're really like running around.
That was one of my questions actually. Is this notion of the phenomenological must come through in certain materials stronger than others?
It does, I think. And so, for example, the just using the rust and the iron oxide, and I think that has a very phenomenological kind of comes from the earth kind of a thing. Yeah, no, very, very much so. And I think that's part of, I think, the material agency is exploring that. And, one of the things that I've thought of is, if I were still using the slicing technique, you could do it with steel and laser cut the steel or water jet cut the steel and weld it together and it could rust. I mean, it would weigh literally several tons, but, I think it would be quite interesting. I'm just going to just share for a second. Can you see the screen?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Oh, they're
that's
lovely.
the hallway of the studio. So this is that piece that Chud was talking about, while I was assembling it. So that's, you can see the, just in process of the MDF where it's cut and starting to rack it up and trying to line it up. So she has all the not all, but a lot of the negatives of the negatives.
They look like portraits, like sculptural portraits of, strange beings, sort of humanoids gone a bit wrong.
Or
Yeah,
some sort
actually,
of mapping, some sort of land coordinate.
Yeah.
no, it's
Gorgeous.
exactly because that's what I was saying to Yasmin. That's, from being an architect, that's how you work with contours in the land, is doing those contour mappings. And, I just remember kind of when I was a young architect at university, I worked for a civil engineer for a while when I was in Central California, and there weren't many architectural jobs, but he did a lot of topography work. So you had to, and this was before computers, and just using pen, pencil, and triangles and no T-squares, just working with contours. And that, I guess that has kind of stuck in the back of my mind.
Yeah.
But this works. It really works. That color, the way it looks, and then they look like countries. And when you layer them, they look even more made. And when you color them black, I know it works. It is striking. It is beautiful. But it's just that something about the green, the terrain, the rawness. It works. It just works.
It almost looks, it's sort of military in its green.
I guess it is. It has that, cocky green, kind of your fatigues there as you're going out on patrol.
That's why I like it.
That's the finished piece, is it?
Yeah, finished piece
Yeah.
before the pieces all got put together, and then I painted it. And so, but Chud was saying, which I can see where she's coming from, is put it together, but leave it in this format.
Yeah.
I think it looks quite organic, doesn't it? That's, with it being wood as well as the color
beautiful.
green, and then it's relating to the landscape. It's very much, that's why you can distinguish it differently to then the colored blocked ones, because then you lose that natural look, the organic sort of look.
Yeah.
And we can also see all the lining up. So there's lots more information to actually read inside it rather than covering it all over with black. I love those grid lines. You can see those grid lines running right through.
Yeah, no, because exactly as you say, that's the just methodology that I use to line the pieces up to each other.
And also, it looks like something, when you're looking at an aeroplane, you're looking down.
Oh yeah, no, very, very, very much so. These kind of like the rice paddies or something out there.
Yeah.
Show the picture of the finished one, the black one.
Let's see if I've got that here.
We'll take an audience vote.
Yeah, let me
We
just
can
find it
compare
here.
them, contrast them. That's the black one. Yeah, if you get a closer look of that, I can't really.
Sorry, let me just zoom in here.
See, it looks larval, doesn't it? It looks like larval.
Yeah, it does. It looks like you're on land. You've taken a bit of Lanzarote home with you or something.
Yeah, it does. It looks like it is lovely. It's amazing.
Yeah. So that's that you use that other thing to make a mold for that?
No, what those pieces that you saw, that's this, and that's all those pieces put together.
Oh,
It's
okay.
interesting how the color has changed the whole look.
Yeah.
And the
It
density,
tremendously changed it. Yeah. So I
Yeah,
mean, it's
tremendously.
but
Wow.
like once you put the color on, you can't undo it and get. Well, I guess you could. You could sandblast it to try and get
Oh.
the original.
Too much of work.
Lester, could you just compare this where you've got your slices of MDF cut and then put together compared to one of your sculptures where you used jasmonite, because it's two kind of completely different processes.
Yeah. Okay.
Because
So
here you've made these forms. This is me looking at small images. You've
Yeah.
made the forms and they're contained forms, and you're addressing the voids in between.
in this one, you mean here? That's on the
Yeah,
screen now.
yeah. For this one, could you just talk about the contrast of the two materials in the terms of your sculptural compositions?
Yeah, so the one that we saw before was using the human head as a cutting tool. So what you had was the negative of a head,
Negative.
negative of face. Whereas this is a little bit different. So this is a partial casting of a figure, albeit a mannequin, because my wife wouldn't stay still long enough for me to do the casting. Had to tell her about Anthony Gormley, but that didn't help. So I had to use a mannequin. But it's a negative casting, so it's not the same thing as cutting into, let's say, with the face. So you don't exactly have the negative of it, but it is the negative, but you also see the positive, so to speak, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
So it's very different that way. And again, it's fabric soaked in jasmonite to get the shape. So it's a different technique, and it gives you a different feel.
And maybe at the bottom you talked about decay, mortality, and fragility. I mean, this is just from looking at the picture, which could be, seeing it in real space might give me a very different feel. But they look very strong. They don't look fragile to me. They look quite, they look like they're going to be there forever almost. And you say decay, but I don't see that. I mean, I understand why you're saying it, but I see something quite different. I see something very almost permanent and not prepared to decay.
Okay, no, I mean, it's a fair point. I guess what I was referencing is the fact that something is rusting. That means that eventually it just crumbles and
Right.
apart. So in that context that I meant it, but I see exactly what you mean, that it's, in the way that most people would think about decay, you don't think about, metalwork in that regard. Yeah, so that's a good point.
And this jasmonite what is jasmonite? It's like
it's like acrylic plaster, if you like, or it's kind of somewhere between plaster or fiberglass, but it's studio safe, whereas fiberglass isn't.
So it will eventually probably disintegrate or something.
Well, yeah, excuse me, it's not waterproof.
Right.
So you can't really put this outside because then it would seriously decay.
But you do get waterproof jasmonite.
You can, but it's actually
a
cementitious based, whereas this is more of an acrylic base. But you're right. So, whereas I think something, where did I put it? This one on the right, that's done with cement and concrete. That's rags soaked in that. So that is, that's outside. That's in my front garden down on the south coast. So that, holds up to the weather pretty well. Whereas if you had done that in jasmonite, it would dissolve after a couple of years.
Yeah.
Lester, just going back to the torso one, and you've said castings. Did you make a mold?
No,
you cast straight onto the mannequin.
I bought a mannequin and then just cast onto
Okay.
No,
I was going to quiz you if you'd said you made a mold, because then again you get another type of negative space inside the mold.
Yeah, no, I mean, I would like to experiment, but I was just teasing about my wife not staying still, but to do something off and something that I started doing experiments with non-human, so objects, but then I started just something that has been really interesting to me about using bits of the body or the human figure, and it just I just have a fascination that just interests me when I work with it. So I'm not saying I want to do all the pieces like that, but there is an interest in that, and I don't know quite why that is, but there is something in my brain that responds to it.
Because it reminds me a little bit of those statues that you see in museums where the head and the arms have been cut, everything's been cut off, and you're just left with a torso.
Well, it's true, and in fact, the examiners said something similar, and I forget which sculpture they reference. I mean, probably one of the Greek ones in the British Museum or
Yeah.
something. But
it's the Elgin marbles.
Yeah.
possibly.
Or the Venus in the Louvre.
Yeah,
Right.
it's something. Yeah, so I mean, there is that. I guess in terms of social mediation, there is that reference out there. So it does. Whether you like it or not, to some people, it will certainly reference that.
But I thought you also talked about Paul Celan, his sort of moving poetry from the Holocaust, and because I was quite influenced by haikus, and you also you like the I mean, he's such a powerful poet, but you seem to go back to him.
Well, it's just I think Doris Salcedo made reference to him, and I think I think Unlund, Audible in the Mouth title comes from a Paul. In fact, it does comes from a Paul Celan poem. So on that basis, I started reading some of them, and one of the things that, again, in terms of social mediation, if you like, a title carries meaning with it, whether you like it or not, even if you call it untitled. So if you're trying to amplify the resonances and intensities, why not use the title as a way of amplifying that? So that's why I was looking to use the Paul Celan poems.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I know he's being tongue in cheek, but Duchamp was saying that the most important thing about an artwork is its title.
I think so. I think so. I think a lot of work has really boring titles. So it's nice when you give it something a bit punchy.
Yeah.
Well, it's also it affects your understanding of the piece completely.
Well, exactly. It can start to frame people's perception, very much so.
Yeah.
I'm really curious about the matrix that you've drawn up. Lester, can you scroll down to that again?
Yeah, let me just get
I think
this.
it's a great way to start to sort of look at.
It looks a bit too mathematical for me.
Well, but that's my architectural brain.
It's like a Carroll diagram.
Yeah.
Like a what diagram?
Carroll diagram, isn't Carroll? Lewis Carroll, the way he had.
I'm not familiar with the Lewis Carroll diagram.
Yeah, he was a mathematician, wasn't he?
Oh, okay. I didn't realize that.
He had this square thing going on like this.
I think it's really interesting the way you've analyzed your practice in this way. I mean, and so that you kind of said, oh, I'm in the top right, mostly in the top right corner, and I'm not sure if it really matters, but I just think it's kind of quite fascinating, sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Extrapolation or something, extrapolation of practice to do it in this way. I've never come across it, but I rather like it.
Yeah, no, I just came across, up with the idea just over the summer while I was doing the rewrite, because my original research questions were basically, how do the planets align kind of thing. And the examiners, and quite rightly said, it's just far too ambitious and you'll never finish it in a PhD. So you have to become much more, narrow focus. So this was a way of narrowing down the focus. And I thought it's worked pretty well for me to look at it in that way.
Do you, in terms of your focus, just if forgetting the diagram or anything, do you have a sort of sense of a burning sense of I absolutely want to go in this direction, and any particular direction as well? Do you
Yeah,
have
I think because of my architectural background, I'm interested in if I can do something on a larger scale in a three-way connection, the environment, the artwork, and the individual. So I would like to try my hand, as I was saying earlier, to put in some proposals for some public artwork. And
so
see what
that's
we
sort
can
of
make out of it.
phenomenological, and also when you say environment, is that some sort of reference to environmental critique, or just the
Well,
environment?
it could be. I no, I didn't mean it in terms of environmental critique. I just meant in terms of that there's a three-way connection.
Yeah,
It's not just about an object that you're looking at on a plinth, but that you're part of your movement through it is part of the artwork or your
yeah,
perception of it.
yeah, I understand.
My question to you, Lester, is how do you define an object?
It can be when you certainly, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but when you start getting into the middle here, it gets a little bit murky. And it's I guess what is the was it Tony Smith? I think he was something. I think it's Tony Smith. Yeah, he did the sculpture called Die, and it's a 6-foot square Corten steel cube, and I think it was in the Metropolitan Museum garden. I don't know if it's still there. And he was asked, why is it 6 foot high? Because he said if it was bigger than that, it would be a monument, and if it was smaller than that, it would be an object. So in other words, what he was doing is making reference to the size of the human body as the dividing line between, let's say, in this case, object and installation. So I think there's a peppercorn of truth in that observation.
But what is your
It's just down to scale.
understanding of object? What is an object to you? I think is that what
Yeah,
you
so I guess it's a good question, Vonda. So I think to me, an object is something that it stands by itself and it's not trying to relate with the environment that it's in. So it's just you and the object itself. Whereas, I don't know if you can see my cursor. This was my final project for my MFA at Westdean. And
Yeah.
again, I don't think this was all that successful, but it was trying to do something that there was various sculptures in a space that you walk through and you were defined by that environment.
Right.
So, that would definitely not be an object, but there were objects in it. Whereas something like here in the upper right-hand corner, that is an object on a plinth.
Right. Yeah.
But is it purely scale then? Because if that green sculpture was bigger, you could climb all over it.
I guess so. Yeah. I mean, I'd say that would be part of it. Sure. But then, there's a whole issue of scale and size, and they're not directly related. And in fact, that was one of my, not a dissertation, but we had to do annual papers for the MFA. And one of them one year I did was on size and scale in sculpture, and what the differences were and how they were applied in sculpture. But all very good questions. So thank you very much for your, for that and for
It's going to be really interesting to see how your PhD evolves and where you come to.
Well, I'm curious as well, but I really, I'm working part-time as an architect, and it's been taking a little bit too much of my time in the last year or two. So I'm trying to redress the balance a bit.
Yeah, it's very hard to do both. And you can't, you sort of, your mind goes into architecture and then you have to flip out of that and go into your art practice. I had the same when I was doing my PhD with medicine. It was kind of, it's confusing somehow.
It is, and just because that, I don't have defined hours, so it's kind of a free flow between the two, and I find that's just very difficult sometimes to get the headspace.
Yeah.
Just to have clear art headspace, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally.
I'm really curious too to see how, as a working artist, whether you move into the space that the PhD produces, or the PhD comes down like some sort of matrix over the top of the practice, or does it sort of meet in the middle? There must be sort of these incredible forces that are sort of pulling it backwards and forwards, I'm guessing.
There is. I guess what I'm trying to do is to just focus and only do artwork that is in line with the PhD research, even though there might be other things that I'm interested in until such time as I finish it. And just to really focus and drill down, because I just don't have the time to do just different things that aren't related to it. So it's, you know, and I'm very happy, and I enjoy it a lot. So I'm not complaining in the slightest. But it's a very focused way of working, which, you know, it's kind of the first time that I've done that. Whereas at the Royal College and everywhere else, I was kind of all over the place. And that's one of the exercises for me, is to get that focus, which I never had before. So it's, you know, that's kind of a lot of trial and error and trying to get there.
Yeah. I mean, I think the danger with any PhD is that you go you're sort of having to justify everything on the basis of theory. And I really strongly believe, having gone through this whole thing, that practice should come first.
And in fact, that's what the examiner said, because in fact, when I had my first submission document, it was more heavily loaded on the theory.
Yeah.
And they said exactly that. And they said, you need to really flip the emphasis around, and the practice has to drive the research. And one of the things that, in fact, I find it intellectually very interesting, but, you know, how do you merge a theory like Deleuze and intensities, or Bergson matter and memory? And how does that actually apply in concrete terms to a piece of sculpture that you're making? And I think that's just, for me, it's very interesting and challenging to think that through.
But I think applying it is problematic. Because I've seen philosophers write stuff about artists, and they apply their philosophy to the practice. And it should be the other way around. If that makes sense. It should be like a philosopher might be tempted to think differently because of an encounter with practice.
Possibly, but I guess what I'm saying is, you know, you take the concept of intensities and, you know, intensities and affects, and does that generate an experience in your mind that is the unpresentable or the sublime, which I think it can do. But so how do you meld that thinking into something that you're making to instantiate it? So I've tried to use color or materials or negative shapes and so forth. So it's trying to go back and forth between the two.
Yeah, sure. No, yeah, it's not straightforward, but it's like one has to influence the other. Like it's an influence rather than a.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what they say, you know, so you need to, each has to inform the other.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's probably something that is done with a lot of time and space, which is sort of the reading, and everything is just sort of gently bubbling and becoming those sort of sediment layers.
Yes.
Process.
Yeah, I think so. And my supervisors have all said, and I'm sure it probably was for you, Vonda, when you were doing your PhD, that you know, what you start off doing is not where you're going to end up, but, you know, it's a kind of a journey, and you just have to go with it.
Yeah, absolutely, totally. Yeah.
You know, so already just in the 2 years part-time, you know, my thinking has changed a bit, and particularly, you know, I was more on the phenomenological track. And one of my supervisors, she's head of the department and is an art historian by background. And, you know, she's like, you know, your starting point is Kant, but you really have to move away from Kant, you know, to go forward out of this, and, you know, see kind of where the fault lines are. So, you know, she didn't make me, but suggested, which I did, reading Hegel, and just where he comes from a different perspective on that. So, you know, I've come to appreciate more the social mediation of things, and, you know, I'm coming around to the thesis that they're actually not different things, but they're coming from the same wellspring, but just coming at it from slightly different directions, if you like.
Yes. I must send you an article I just recently read by Hito Sturl.
Yeah.
About subject object. It's sort of like trying to like it's a critique of Kant, Hegel, and I guess the Western canon, because of this separation between subject and object.
Is that the one that's on perspective?
Yes.
I forget the name of it, but it's a great essay.
It's great. It's in eFlux. It's on eFlux.
Yeah.
You
sent it to all of us.
Could you say,
yeah, I'll try. I must get the
sounds really good.
Yeah, I've got to find it now. I bookmarked it, I think.
I've got the essay somewhere in the archives.
Okay. I was thinking a lot, just because I've recently read it. I was thinking when you were talking about that essay. So it's great that you're, you know, familiar with it.
I'm pretty sure we're talking about the same one.
Yeah. Let me find it. Efflux heto. How do you spell hetos? Heto.
Steyerl.
I got it.
Yes.
In defense of the poor image, number 2.
No, I don't think it's that one.
No, it's not that one. Where is it now?
See if I can quickly find it here.
Oh yes, in free
Oh,
fall,
in free fall, that's it. Yeah.
a thought experiment on vertical perspective.
Yeah,
So I've now got I've got it up. Now, how do I send it to you? Share. Messages. And
oh, you can see the title page from this. Can you see it on the screen there?
Yeah.
oh, you got it. You've done it. I think it's really. It's really worth reading. Have I gone? No, I'm here.
No, you're there.
Yeah, I think it touches on a lot of the things that Jonathan was talking to us about when he was talking about comparing Japanese and Chinese art history with the Western canon. Yeah, it was very, very connected to that.
Yeah, I haven't read it for a couple of years, but you've encouraged me to reread it, so I will do that.
Yeah.
Maybe you could reply to the email and send it all back to us.
Yeah, because I've got it as an independent article, so I'll dig it out and send it to the group.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thanks.
Brilliant. Brilliant.
Lester, are you happy for me to share the PowerPoint presentation you've made tonight?
Of course, yeah. Do you want me to email it to you?
Yes, please. That'd be
Yeah.
fantastic.
Yeah, no, very happy for you to do that.
Great.
No NDAs that need signing here.
Perfect. That's great.
Well, you guys have been fantastic. So really, thank you so much for being so attentive and asking such great questions. It's really a privilege to be part of that.
Thank you for
Thank
sharing.
you very much.
Thank you for
presentation. I
sharing.
really enjoyed it.
Really great.
Brilliant. And I think it's Natasha next week. Is that right? Presenting?
I don't know.
Great. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, thank you,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Take care.